Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thy unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and the happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of all hearts of persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost, be with us all forevermore. Amen. Thank you for that.
Excuse me, I'll validate Mr. Absent.
Okay. Honorable members, I have received word from the Honorable Member for Ancillary Canaries that he is out of state on official state business. I have also received word from the Honorable Moses Jabates, sorry about that, member for Viewford North, was indicating that he may not be with us this morning. I have also received word from the Honorable and member for Library that he is running a bit late this morning. Statement by ministers. Papers to be laid. The Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled...
Honorable, papers. Yes.
My apologies, ma'am. I'd like to lay the St. Lucia Air and Sea Ports Authority 2015 Annual Report and the St. Lucia Air and Sea Ports Authority 216 Annual Report.
Bills. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service.
Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled International Business Companies.
International Business Companies Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg for move for the suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move to the second reading of a bill shortly entitled International Business Companies Amendment. On November 20 of 2018, legislation was considered in the House to amend a suite of legislation and came into force on the 12th of December 2018. These amendments were necessary for compliance with the OECD and EU criteria for tax compliance and avoidance from being blacklisted as a tax haven. The amendments were to the International Trust, International Partnership, International Business Companies, Free Zone and Income Tax Act. The amendments to the International Trust, International Partnership, and the International Companies Acts were considered by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, at their 51st meeting from the 9th to the 11th of January 2019. I'm very happy to report the Forum gave St. Lucia a positive result by concluding that the regimes previously deemed as potentially harmful as having been abolished with one condition. St. Lucia was requested and committed to ensuring that any entity or person that was grandfathered pursuant to the International Trust Act, the International Partnership Act, and the International Business Companies Act could not acquire new assets and intellectual property directly or indirectly from a related party or engage in object of purpose other than the object of purpose for which the company was incorporated. So let me break that down. So first of all, there's a two-pronged process in being able to get off the blacklist. One was to meet the OECD criteria, and then the second one now is to be interviewed and reviewed by the EU. St. Lucia has successfully passed the OECD stage. One of the things that's remaining, as you remember, Mr. Speaker, is that we grandfathered the existing IBCs so that they could stay intact until June of 2021. This further clause now puts a restriction on those existing IBCs to limit their practices to what they were first approved for. So it means that even though they're grandfathered in, they cannot change the purpose of what the entity was. And so we've agreed to amend our previous bills in order to be able to do that. So, Mr. Speaker, the three bills that are coming next, which is the International Business Companies Amendment, the International Partnership Amendment, and the International Trust Amendment, all have to do with this one thing. So basically, we're making a similar amendment in those three acts to make sure that we have a common definition in order to be able to meet the OECD's criteria. St. Lucia committed to the inclusion of this amendment to the aforementioned acts to maintain the assessment results obtained by the FHTP. The result of abolished is significant as this ensures greater investor confidence in St. Lucia, and it is hoped that this will augur well for St. Lucia for future assessment by other international bodies, primarily the EU. The International Business Companies Act, Section 3 of the IBC, is being amended. The amendment of Section 3 is done, 1, by deleting subsection 3 and substituting the following. An international business company incorporated prior to the first day of December 2018 shall not, A, require any new asset or engage in an object or purpose other than the object or purpose for which the company was incorporated, and B, acquire directly or indirectly intellectual property from a related party. 2, inserting a new subsection 4 after subsection 3 to read as follows. Subsection 3B is deemed to have come into force on the 31st day of August 2018. The amendment of the International Partnership Act, so amendment of section 24 of the Act, is amended by deleting subsection 2 and substituting the following. 1, an international partnership registered prior to the first day of December 2018 shall not, A, acquire any new asset or engage in any object or purpose other than the object or purpose for which it was established, and B, acquire directly or indirectly intellectual property from a related party. 2, B, by inserting immediately after subsection 2 the following new subsection 3. 3 subsection and 2B is deemed to have come into force on the 31st day of August 2018. The final amendment of the International Trust Act in section 10 is amended by inserting immediately after subsection 5 the following new subsections 6 and 7. The new subsection 6 should read, an international trust established prior to the first day of December 2018 shall not acquire directly or indirectly intellectual property from a related party. And 2, the new subsection 7 should read, subsection 6 is deemed to have come into force on the 31st day of August 2018. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, I also at this point really want to thank again the team from the Ministry of Inland Revenue and also the team at the Ministry of Finance, as well as the FRA for their incredible work that they have done in being able to achieve this first milestone of being able to get approval from the OECD. And I think that we've been able to do it in a manner in which we're able to preserve our competitiveness with IBCs. Now that our IBCs now will be merged with our local companies, and by having the new tax that we've set in, that all of the benefits that you had of being an IBC are now preserved, but certainly in eliminating the ring fencing which the OECD and the EU were concerned about. So again, my congratulations to the team, and on behalf of the government and the people of St. Lucia, I want to sincerely thank them for their dedication, their professionalism, and I look forward to us being able to get off of the EU list. Hopefully, Mr. Speaker, we were hearing originally that we would get a result by January, but my understanding is that the EU might be postponing and pushing back that date because they themselves now have to reassess how they want to be able to evaluate, because in making these changes, it creates now the necessity to come to a common definition of substance, meaning what is the activity those companies can be involved in order to be able to qualify as a company in St. Lucia and recognized on an international basis. So again, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much, and I look forward to the support of my colleagues in being able to make these amendments.
Honourable members, the question is that the International Business Companies Amendment Bill be read a second time. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I just have two questions. One, to the best of my knowledge, when we got blacklisted, it was for the base erosion and profit sharing problems that we had. I just want to ask the Prime Minister whether we've cleared that. And secondly, the tax rates. I know there are some countries in the region that have changed their tax rates. The tax rate for the IBC is the same as the tax rate for local companies. That happened in some islands. Just want to ask the Prime Minister whether that is the case in St. Lucia.
Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The hurdle we were trying to overcome, Mr. Speaker, was primarily one of ring fencing. So the EU in particular, and then joined in by the OECD, basically wanted to eliminate regimes in countries in which there seemed to be a two-tax structure. So that in offering what we call an IBC and in comparing it to a local company, an IBC benefited from either having to pay 0% tax or 1% tax. That was choice was given to them. An IBC also benefited from not having to pay any taxes on withholding tax, did not have to pay any taxes on withholding, interest earned, and capital gains. Now, our local companies also benefited from those exact same tax incentives, other than the fact that they were paying a 30% tax rate. So the member from Castries East is correct that, and I will name the country, Barbados, as an example. What Barbados did in order to meet the new criteria is they merged the tax rate from the IBCs with the tax rate of domestic taxes. So a company in Barbados now who was paying, I believe, 35% was their tax rate, now pays, I think, 5% on the first $1 million, or if they're earning $1 million, and then goes all the way down to 1% depending on how much their total earnings were. And that also applies to the IBCs, and everything else stays intact. What we did in St. Lucia was slightly different in that we created what's called a territorial tax structure. And so, Mr. Speaker, the way the territorial tax structure works is that we basically said that we are not going to charge taxes on foreign income. So the same way that we exempt companies from paying the capital gains tax or paying taxes on interest earned, it is not that the rate is zero. It is that we're not going to tax them. And it's a very important distinction to be able to make. And let me explain to you why. Is the IBCs, particularly the ones that came from the CARICOM, wanted to be able to benefit from the double taxation treaty that they had within CARICOM. Meaning, if they paid the 1% tax, they could then remit monies back to another CARICOM country, okay, and not having to pay taxes on that because they would have paid the 1%. But now the fact that we have really one regime, and the fact is that an IBC now will be considered to be like a local company. Any earnings that it has overseas will not be taxable. But if that IBC was to earn any income in St. Lucia, they would pay 30%. So it achieves two things. One, it holds the principle that they would have paid taxes on that money. It's not because it's zero, but the fact is that they're liable to pay taxes on it. And it just happens that the country has a territorial tax structure and they don't have to pay taxes on it. The second component of this is that a local company and also IBC already benefit from the other benefits. So a local company was not paying any taxes on interest earned. A local company was not paying taxes on capital gains. So in essence, all of the benefits that an IBC had previously, even though now it's going to be considered a local company, all those benefits remain in place. The more important part and the more difficult part now is to obtain a common definition of what we call substance. So the member from Castries East, who's an accountant, would understand what I'm speaking about. If we take simply a holding company as an example, Mr. Speaker, how much activity does a holding company have to have in St. Lucia for it to be considered a company based in St. Lucia? And there's a multitude of different definitions. I think that the minimum standard would be that that company at least have its board meetings in St. Lucia. For different companies will require different levels of compliance as it deals with substance. So a discussion that's taking place is a company allowed to outsource? So can your board be here and your CEO be here and you're deemed to be a St. Lucian company? So that is the next step or next hurdle that we have to be able to achieve. But from a tax perspective, Barbados has gone down one road, and we will all recognize, I think, that there's some benefits of going the direction that they have gone. For sure, given that they're going through a massive structural adjustment program, being able to stimulate their private companies by providing a lower tax base makes all the sense in the world. Now, one would hope that the activities of the local companies would increase sufficiently that in absolute terms, the amount of tax they were collecting before, potentially they may be able to do that. But that's a lot of growth that they would have to see domestically in order for that to happen. So they've, in essence, sacrificed taxes on their local businesses in order to maintain the taxes on the IBCs. In the case of St. Lucia, we only had 5,000 IBCs. And the total amount of taxes that we were collecting were in the vicinity of 2 to 2.5 million EC dollars a year. So we felt that we were not making a huge sacrifice on that side, but we believe that if we can now allow our IBCs to still be competitive, and as members will know, that we have passed what we call an amendment to our IBC, which is our Headquarters Act. And now maybe the understanding of what we were trying to do in anticipation of what was taking place, because 5,000, and anticipating what was coming down the pipeline, the Headquarters Act allows companies now to, in effect, create more substance in the destination. So if we use Digicel as an example, they have over 150 people that are here. My understanding is that they're going to continue to grow that number, and it may get up as much as 250. All of a sudden, it starts looking like a real company, and this is not a shell in which monies are just remitting through. So the combination of what we've done with the territorial tax structure, our anticipation of where this was going to go as long ago as a year or more, of creating what we call a headquarters amendment, I believe will allow St. Lucia maybe not to increase the number of IBCs that we had, but I genuinely believe that we're going to increase the amount of activity an IBC has. So whereas lawyers may have been making money on registration of IBCs, those same lawyers now will be making more money by actually transacting legal activities for those companies, because they would have to be doing more activity in St. Lucia. So it's a different way to be able to skin the cat. I'm sure that time will tell, and I'm hopeful that both the Barbados process as well as ours will be able to work and succeed. As I said to you, we're past the first hurdle, and we are now waiting approval from the EU on the last piece that we have to be able to. I'm hoping that I was able to answer the member from Castries East adequately in my response.
Honorable members, the question is that the International Business Companies Act be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the International Business Companies Act, Cap 12.14.
Honorable members, this is a short bill. Clause 2.
Amendment to Section 3.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Aye. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the International Business Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the International Business Companies Amendment Bill be read a third time and pass. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the International Business Companies Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of a bill shortly entitled the International Partnership Amendment.
International Partnership Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the International Partnership Amendment. And if it pleases the House, it is exactly the same explanation as I had given before, because we're just making the same amendment in a different act. And the same thing will happen in the next bill as well.
Honorable members, the question is the International Partnership Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question in. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the International Partnership Act, Cap 12.21.
Again, honorable members, this is a short bill. Clause 2.
Amendment of Section 24.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the International Partnership Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the International Partnership Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put that question. As many as of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the International Partnership Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled International Trust Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister, you've just jumped.
Oh, my apologies. Too much anxious. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled International Trust Amendment.
International Trust Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through the remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable members, the question is that the International Trust Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put that question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the International Trust Act, Cap 12.19.
Honorable members, another short bill. Clause 2.
Amendment to Section 10.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Aye. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the International Trust Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the International Trust Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the International Trust Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment.
Income Tax Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for a second reading of a bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment. The aforementioned amendments are being proposed to enable the Department of Finance to maximize the collection of revenue and reduce the level of arrears to the government of St. Lucia by its creditors. Again, the next set of bills are all an adjustment based on this premise. At present, some of the persons paid by the government of St. Lucia for services provided who are not regular employees of the public service, therefore not on the regular payroll of the government of St. Lucia, may be paid a lump sum with payments not being made from income tax, therefore resulting in the creation of a tax liability which remains outstanding for an unreasonably length period of time. The Civil Code Cap 4.01 provides for a set-off between a debtor and a creditor, and under Articles 117 and 127A, Article 117 states the following. When two persons are mutually debtor and creditor for each other, both debts are extinguished by setting off in the cases and the manner hereinafter mentioned. And Article 1127A states, and I quote, in addition to the cases in which set-off may be pleaded under the foregoing articles, set-off may be pleaded in all cases in which it may be pleaded by the law of England, end of quote. So the amendment of the Income Tax Act, this amendment is to facilitate the collection of revenue by Inland Revenue Department, where persons may be in receipt of payments from the government of St. Lucia, however, have outstanding tax arrears. In many cases, persons collect large sums of money from the government of St. Lucia, whilst leaving their tax liability unsettled. These amendments will provide a mechanism by which the Controller of Inland Revenue Department can request from the Director of Finance or the Controller of Customs to offset any tax liability outstanding against the tax arrears of a taxpayer. The amendment of the Income Tax Act is as follows. Section 127 of the Income Tax Act is amended by inserting immediately after subsection 3 the following new subsections. 4. The Controller may direct the Director of Finance and Planning to set off the amount of tax debt or part of tax debt against sums due by the government to a tax debtor if the government holds, controls, and has custody or has monies belonging to the tax debtor and is due to make payment to the tax debtor. Or 5, the Controller may, not or, and 5, the Controller may direct the Controller of the Customs and Excise Department to set off monies due to a person against a tax outstanding by that person. The amendment to the Finance Administration Act is as follows. Part 9 of the Finance Administration Act provides for the abandonment of claims and the write-off of public monies and stores. It does not provide for a set-off. When such cases arise, that person performs services for the government of St. Lucia and are paid in full, but a tax liability is likely to be unpaid, the government should have the ability to set off the tax debt against the payment due to the individual. As such, it is being proposed that the heading of Part 9 of the Finance Administration Act be amended to include set-off. Additionally, it is proposed that Section 42 of the Finance Administration Act be amended to empower the Director of Finance and Planning with due approval from the Minister of Finance to set off amounts due by a debtor. The amendment to the Customs Control and Management Act. The Customs and Control and Management Act makes provision for the abatement of duties in Section 71, power of Cabinet to refund duty on goods, Section 76, and recovery of amounts due in Section 77. Yes. Yeah. The amendment to the Customs Control and Management Act will allow the debts of an individual or entity to be set off against the amounts to be refunded by the individual or entity. No. So let me there's some little confusion, and let me highlight everyone. Like the past set of bills, when we make the amendments to be able to set off, it affects several different regimes, and therefore we are adjusting the regime. So I'm providing explanatory notes for the concept and how it would then affect each one of the next upcoming bills. The amendment of the Customs Control and Management Act will allow for the debts of an individual or entity to be set off against the amounts to be refunded to the individual or entity. Additionally, the amendment will allow the settlement of liabilities from amounts payable by the government of St. Lucia to be made by the Accountant General's Department. The amendment of Section 71 of the Act allows the Controller of Customs and Excise to direct the Director of Finance or the Controller of Inland Revenue to set off monies. The amendment of Section 76 of the Act empowers the Cabinet of Ministers to remit or refund a duty payable on goods replaced under warranty if a warranty exists and the value of the warranty is included in the customs value on which the duty as paid on goods required replacement. The amendment of Section 77 of the Act allows for recovery of amounts due to be extended to a set-off arrangement authorized by the law. So the next set of bills, and let me say them specifically, the Income Tax Amendment, the Finance Administration Amendment, and the Customs Control and Management Amendment are the three areas in which we're making amendments in order to be able to put this set-off in practice. And this is just a practical way of being able to resolve issues on both sides. So it means that government certainly will not be paying somebody money if they're owed money, and certainly on the other side, if somebody is owed money, is owed money, but they also owe the government money, the two also can be offset. So it works both ways in that regard. So again, I'm seeking members' support in being able to make these amendments. Thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that the Income Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Chair, Mr. Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, there is a 10% withholding tax that is paid that can be deducted when government makes, when government procures any services, they can deduct 10%. I would like to know, does that 10%, does that kick in when the 10% is not collected, or does it kick in after the 10% is collected, or if after the taxpayer has prepared his return, then the 10% is not enough to cover his tax liability. I just want to find out where does the 10% come, or where the 10% will not be taken at all. How does the withholding tax relate to that? And secondly, I am not clear whether Cabinet of Ministers get involved in that, whether the Cabinet of Ministers can act on their own discretion or whether they can act on the advice of the official in the Ministry of Finance. In that case, it says the Director of Finance or the Comptroller of Inland Revenue, but I would think we should be speaking about the Permanent Secretary, who is the accounting officer, and who is the one who, in effect, is in charge of accountability in the ministry. So these are the 2 points that I want to make on that bill: the 10% and the role of the Cabinet of Ministers, whether the Cabinet of Ministers have the final say or whether they will act on the advice of the bill says Director of Finance. I think it should be the Permanent Secretary. That is my contribution to these bills, and it's the same thoughts that I have for all the other three. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member Vifotsa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing my light as quickly as you did today. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the explanatory note to legislation often never tells the whole story as to why legislation is being introduced. It seeks basically to explain the various provisions and what the provisions say. That being said, however, Mr. Speaker, the principle of set-off is well known, well understood, not just in our private law, but also otherwise in other legal affairs, so that there can never really be any serious objection to a principle of set-off. And with the government of St. Lucia having different revenue agencies, there's no harm in the different revenue agencies being brought together to exercise principles of set-off. So really, this is nothing new. Indeed, one might even argue that there is no need for legislation to govern this because the principle is already practiced in the public service. There have been several instances in the past where set-off has been granted to nullify one tax commitment to one agency to another, or to circumstances where an individual or company has money owed due to them by the government, and that money is used to pay off another agency. So the principle is understood, it's practiced, and it's debatable whether you need legislation. But if the authorities that we feel they need the protection of legislation, there is, in my view, no harm. It would have been good, however, to get a statement on the frequency and extent of the problem. Whether this is a pervasive problem in the public service, whether it's a pervasive problem in relation to the income tax department, the customs department, or the problem is so deep that it warrants this intervention, or whether this is warranted because particular companies or individuals are affected. And again, there's no quarrel if, of course, the principle is exercised to deal with those issues. But the question is whether it is so pervasive and widespread that you require this. That being said, Mr. Speaker, I want very quickly to echo the comments made by the Leader of the Opposition, but perhaps to enhance it with a gloss or to expand on what he has indicated. The problem that the Leader of the Opposition is raising is affected across the board to all three bills before the House, but with different degrees of severity. And perhaps we can take the Income Tax Amendment Act, the bill before us initially, and then as we proceed with the Finance Administration Amendment Act and the Customs Control and Management Act, where the problem is most pervasive and it is at its deepest, or rather, let me just go through that very quickly. Yes, where the problem is perhaps at its deepest. The problem is this. I am aware that the current position of Director of Finance and the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, have been merged. So the Permanent Secretary functions also as Director of Finance. That position is cast at grade 21. Of course, when you look at the Finance Act, it clearly draws a distinction between the Director of Finance and the Permanent Secretary. The Constitution recognizes the Permanent Secretary as the accounting officer, the head of the department. So, the Director of Finance is junior, or supposed to be junior to the Permanent Secretary, except, of course, where the post is merged, as in this case. But there's no question that there's a blurring of the financial powers and authorities of the two functionaries. But I'm not going to go there today. I'll leave that for another time. The fact of the matter is that the controller is appointed, I believe, at grade 20. The Director of Finance and Planning is also at grade 20. So you have a situation on the Income Tax Act where two co-equals are operating with each other on the assumption that the Director of Finance is not the Permanent Secretary Finance. So you have a situation where the controller will direct a co-equal, the Director of Finance, to set off. Now, clearly that has to be unheard of. And furthermore, the Director of Finance is not the head of the department. What if the Permanent Secretary, if the two posts are separated, says to the Director of Finance, you can't do this? The Director of Finance can argue, well, statute allows me to override you even though you're head of the department. And the Director of Finance may be right that this is what Parliament says. But the response clearly of the Permanent Secretary could well be, but the Constitution says I'm head of the department. And this should not happen. As I said, Mr. Speaker, the problem may well be resolved if, of course, that there is a difference in terminology, a difference in language. But you can't have a situation where persons who are essentially co-equals one is directing the other. So I believe that to avoid administrative confusion and to bring some clarity, some definition of nomenclature is absolutely necessary and vital. So really, there are 2 points. One, setup is understood, necessary, though it would have been a good thing to know how pervasive the problem is. Number 2, the approach can take serious administrative dichotomies, can cause serious administrative confusion if the current language is maintained. Because you cannot have one grade 20 directing another grade 20 who is in fact a junior in a situation where you may have the 2 posts separated, as is likely to happen someday again. So in my view, some serious rethinking has to be done to the provision, to the section, to ensure that there is statutory comity with the proposed amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Carteret Office.
Mr. Speaker, I think the intention of the legislation, the legislative amendments are clear. Presently in the system, as the member for Beaufort South indicated, that this is a practice that exists. But the problem with the practice as it exists today, a lot of it has to do with who you know and who's willing to consider you at the point in time. So you find that some people have leverage, and they can go in and they can negotiate depending on the department and come up with something that may be suitable. So at the end of the day, when the legislation is in place, it also gives one of the affected parties, let's say it's an ordinary citizen who's owing the government. And we see that all the time. The decisions are subjective because it is optional. Whereas with the legislation, while there must be consensus on the part of both parties, it is also important that it empowers the 2 entities to get together. Now, getting to the point where one public servant would be seen as directing another public servant. Are they not all government employees charged with the responsibility of managing the affairs and doing the things? So at the end of the day, they may be from different departments in government. And that is something that must not be allowed to perpetuate in the government, where everybody thinks that they are an authority unto themselves. And if this is not my ministry, then nobody cannot tell me anything about how to do it. And I know that's not the intention of what the member for Beaufort South is saying, because we get these pushbacks from ministries all of the time. But we need to get to the point where people would come to realize that it is one government and that every officer, regardless of the department in which they are working, should be working towards one common goal. And I think that this legislation, the amendments that are being made, will strengthen the position and would also give the ordinary citizen some leverage in negotiating where they are, at what point, because we hear it all the time. People say, but I've paid so much taxes, every time the government is owing me money, I cannot get it. But when I need a tax clearance, when I need this or I need that, I have to go and find the money to pay. And sometimes the reconciliations can be problematic. And it is how much attention is paid to it at the time. So I think that this piece of legislative amendment is going to work to the benefit of all parties concerned, and it is something that I think once implemented properly will bring results that all of us can be satisfied with.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to thank the members on the opposite side for their comments. I want to, first of all, say that what we are trying to cure here is where individuals and companies see government as one, but we continue to see ourselves as silos. And so this is giving permission, or the ability, the administrative ability, for different departments who are in the business of either taxing or collecting money from governments in order to be able to interact with each other. What this is not is a cure to any existing administrative problems internally. This is also not intended to change any of our tax structures. So the tax liability that the member from Castries East spoke of remains. So if there's a 10% withholding tax and the person has not paid the tax but happens to getting a refund on duty at customs, it gives the ability now on a voluntary basis, because everybody has to be consenting partners in this, to offset. So how you calculate your taxes remains exactly the same. So there has to be a liability and there has to be a credit on both sides. So all this is allowing is, one, is for those to be offset, but most importantly, what we're trying to achieve here is to give everybody the legal ability to offset each other's debts and credits cross ministries and statutory bodies, because you know that customs is a statutory body. And so if customs has monies as a rebate for somebody, but somebody owes a lot of money in income taxes, it gives the ability as for government agencies to offset each other on their books. This is really to just make it much simpler, and I think that our attitude in office is not to continue to perceive government how we see it, but to see how people see it. And we think that people think of the Ministry of Transportation as the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Agriculture as the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Inland Revenue as being Inland Revenue, and civil status being civil status. No! People see it as one. And when they find that government departments that continue to work as if they're not communicating to others, creates a lot of frustration. Now, the e-government system that we're going to be introducing will do a lot of running around for people in the future. So this thing where you see people taking lines in one building and then going to get another building, and that you have to be told you have to do this, you have to get your trade licenses done, but you can't get your work permits unless you have the trade license approved, and you're going back and forth. I mean, people start saying, well, it doesn't seem like the left hand is doing what the right hand is doing. Once the person is registered as paying their trade license, then there should be a database system that says that, and the person now who is a requirement doesn't ask the person to go off and prove it. They can check on the computer if they have it or not. This is in many ways very similar in allowing an individual who may have money that's owed to him, and that he may owe money and may not be in the position to either get his money or pay off his debt. And therefore he's now trying to get a bank loan, and the bank will not lend him the money because he doesn't have enough cash flow, or that the fact is on his books there's this liability at Inland Revenue. So this is a mechanism that would allow the ministries and departments to legally offset each other. This is not intended to cure any other problem other than that. I just want to say that I agree with the member from Vieux-Fort South. There are a lot of organizational structures we're going to have to review. I think it's a long time pending. And again, the member from Vieux-Fort South will also know that whenever you're proposing changes, particularly when it comes to the workplace, and that we are perceived as being politicians and that we have our own vested interest, that these things come, but they have to come slowly in order people do not question what your intentions are. But we're actually trying to just improve things. So part of the government modernization that we're doing is to look exactly at what the member from Vieux Fort South has indicated. So I'm hoping that I've answered your concerns and questions adequately. Sorry, I mean, the member from, with regards to cabinet, there's only one, I know, but he did, I just want to answer that. He mentioned about cabinet's control, and that's why I was saying to you, nothing has changed. Any of the existing approval processes that exist currently, nothing is being recommended. All this is giving the ability of ministries and departments to offset monies and to treat all the monies as it being government. Because if it was in one department, that department can actually do that. So for instance, if I have a company and I have corporate tax and I'm also collecting VAT, I'm also, there's a possibility within Inland Revenue, because all the monies are there, that the controller of Inland Revenue can do those offsets by themselves. All we're doing is just expanding that capability, but nothing else changes. We're not changing any decision-making authorities. We're not adding any more. We're not allowing cabinet to override any of the decisions. In fact, the reference to cabinet here is strictly on the customs side of it, and it just is very, very specific in terms of what cabinet can do. But certainly the intention here, and I think that we've achieved that, is not to make any changes on the taxes that you're owed or the liabilities you have, or make any changes to the administration. Whatever the processes that are existing in the departments or the ministries still coexist. All this allows them to do is to think of the fund as being one fund and giving them the legal capacity, administrative capacity to offset monies into departmental as well as within government statutory bodies.
Honorable members, the question is that the Income Tax Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question, as many as are of that opinion, we'll get into committee.
Okay.
As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Income Tax Act, capped 15.02.
Honorable members, we can have honorable member for, we are now in committee, so we could have the discussion that immediately close to.
Amendment of Section 127.
Honorable members, we could have the discussion at this point.
I'm happy to have a discussion, it's okay. I'm just saying, it says here the controller may.
Honorable Prime Minister, if I understand what the member is raising, he's saying that currently the post of Director of Finance and the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance is one. And there may be situations when the post of Director of Finance and Permanent Secretary would be separate. And the Director of Permanent Secretary and the Director of Finance, if it is separate, one is above, one is below. And how do you, and the Permanent Secretary is the accounting officer, how do you get the Director of Finance now to speak to the Permanent Secretary to say, is the head of the, yes.
So they can be cured by saying the controller and not director may advise the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And not that
May advise, yeah.
So if it changes,
nobody's fighting about the principle.
Yeah, may advise.
Can I say, for all caution, I don't think it's a problem. I'd be happy to accept the recommendation of the member from Vieux Fort South.
Member for Viewfort South, can you propose so we could take it so down in writing?
The controller may advise the permanent secretary in the permanent secretary.
Yeah, but suggesting it should be the word advise.
To set off the amount. Because the permanent secretary is the accounting head of the department.
We're proposing, we accept the amendment of amending the word direct and putting advise. What we'd like to do is just keep it as finance right now, and if it needs, because this came out of consultation with them, and so the PS of finance was not included in that jargon. So I'd rather just keep it to the director of finance at this point, but we're happy to make the amendment to advise.
Does not cure your problem. The fact of the matter is that your constitution says that the permanent secretary is the head of department and is the officer under the constitution who is accountable for financial matters. Now, statute, of course, can decide to assign some of the responsibilities elsewhere once it doesn't offend the position of the permanent secretary. Now, curiously, the suggestion that it be left to the director is better answered by the current position, because you all have merged the two positions of director of finance and permanent secretary. So it means that the director of finance also wears the hat of permanent secretary. But that's not going to always be the case. The fact of the matter is that the permanent secretary is the financial head of the department. And what you're doing is to give a key financial responsibility to a junior officer of the department of which the permanent secretary is head. Now, you can achieve your objective now because they wear two hats. But that may not always be the case, because if you put in permanent secretary, and I'm not insisting, I mean, that's your choice. If you put in permanent secretary, then in effect it's the same person, because you have director of finance. So why keep, therefore, the director of finance position, which clearly conflicts with the constitutional provision? Don't make sense. Nobody's trying to be difficult.
The member from Viewfort North, Viewfort South is absolutely correct that the two positions are amalgamated right now. And in order for good governance practices down the road, we will agree to the amendment as recommended by the member from Vieux-Fort South.
So the controller may advise the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance and Planning. So noted, Madam Clerk. Finance. It's in the Constitution as in legislation also. Very well. Very well. So clause 2 as amended stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Income Tax Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments to Clause 2. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I move that the amended report of the committee be adopted and the bill read for a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Income Tax Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Income Tax Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Finance Administration Amendment.
Finance Administration Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of this bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. If it's granted.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Finance Administration Amendment. And as indicated previously, this is a continuation of amending the acts in order to be able to create a harmonization for what we're attempting to do here. So, again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Honorable members, the question is that the Finance Administration Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Finance Administration Act, Cap 15.01.
Honorable members, another relatively short bill. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of heading for Part 9.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of Section 43.
Clause 4 as amended stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Finance Administration Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments to Clause 4. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the amended report of the committee be adopted and the bill read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Finance Administration Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Finance Administration Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Customs Control Management Amendment, again, which is a continuation of the mechanism that we're putting forward.
Customs Control and Management Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Customs Control and Management Amendment. I have given the explanation as to why we're doing this, so I'm looking forward to members' support. Obviously, when we go to committee stage, we will make similar amendments that we have made in the two previous bills.
Honorable members, the question is that the Customs Control and Management Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. And many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Customs Control and Management Act, Cap 15.05.
Honorable members, Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 71.
So again, the Section 3, D3, will be changed to the bodies and permanent secretary of Ministry of Finance.
Madam Clerk, you understood?
Yeah.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill as amended. Aye. Clause 4.
Amendments of Section 76.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Aye. Clause 5.
Substitution of Section 77.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Customs Control and Management Amendment Bill went through committee stage with amendments to Clause 3. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the amended report of the committee be adopted and the bill read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Customs Control and Management Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Customs Control and Management Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled National Honors and Awards Amendment.
National Honors and Awards Amendment.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. And many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the National Honors Award Amendment. This is a small amendment, but I would imagine a significant one in terms of a policy shift. This is to do with our highest award, which is the St. Lucia Cross. Previously, the committee was limited to being able to give 2 awards in 3 years. So there was no more than 3 persons in any 2 successive years that were permitted to get the award. And we're making an amendment to allow for there to be 2 awards per year. So in essence, we're increasing the allocation. Instead of having 3 people over 2 years, we're going to have 4 people over the 2 years. And the intention here, Mr. Speaker, is to basically have 1 award on a regular basis which will be given to an outstanding international individual. What we would like to be able to do is to associate our award with persons internationally that stand up to the same values as our country. Very similar, and I'm certainly lofty with regards to the Nobel Laureate, being able to issue awards internationally to support peoples that share the values of their country. So the intention here is not to dilute the award, because I think that was something that was a concern in terms of recognizing that many people on a per annum basis, but to at least reserve 1 of the awards that would be specifically for the international. And I look forward to the support of members in this amendment that we're making.
Honorable members, the question is that the National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill be read a second time. Honorable Member for Castries Central.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the bill presented by the Honorable Prime Minister. And just very quickly to say that there are so many unsung heroes in our country. So many people across the communities of St. Lucia, St. Lucians overseas, who perhaps may never be awarded, because certainly it's not the granting of the award that means that somebody is a person who should be awarded. Maybe the people who most deserve awards will never be found, nominated, or even formally recognized. And so, whilst we are expanding the category here, I want to take this opportunity to let St. Lucians know, because many of us don't know, that anyone any person in St. Lucia can recommend any St. Lucian for an award. When I attend these functions, Mr. Speaker, and I hear the stories of the lives that people have led, of the exemplary lives, of the things they've done, of how they've changed lives, whether we're talking about doctors or lawyers or nurses, policemen, teachers, we hear some amazing stories. Collectonians, young people, artists. We want to hear the stories of the housewives, of the farmers, of the fathers who are exemplary fathers. And when we sit in our offices or even in our constituencies, sometimes we talk to these people and we don't know who they are, but the communities know them. The children know of their parents who've made sacrifices. The people know of the women who have gone through difficult times, violence, persons who've probably abused drugs and have conquered that. The survivors. Sometimes we don't celebrate enough people who've had challenges in lives and have overcome them. So this is just a call to remind St. Lucians that awards are for everybody. Persons in ordinary life who've lived life in an extraordinary way. And so I would like to commend the Prime Minister and the government on expanding the remit of the national awards, in this case the St. Lucia Cross, but also to remind St. Lucians that anyone can recommend someone, and indeed from any walk of life. So we would like to see more St. Lucians being honored in a wider range of categories for probably things that we overlook but are indeed very important. So I commend this to the Honorable House.
Are you, Honorable Prime Minister? Honorable members, the question is that the National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the National Honors and Awards Act, Cap 17.08.
Honorable members, Clause 2.
Amendment of Schedule 1.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the National Honors and Awards Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the National Honors and Awards Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister, can you please turn off your light? Turn off your light.
My apologies.
Honorable Minister for Infrastructure, Ports, Energy and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, to provide
some clarity on a number of issues pertaining to this bill, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading at the next or a subsequent sitting of this Honorable House.
Honorable Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for first reading a bill shortly entitled Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment.
Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Amendment.
Honorable Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation.
Mr. Speaker, while this bill was down for second reading today, we've had a request from the opposition in relation to the City Council bill and this bill that they want some extra time to go through the bill so that they can raise whatever their concerns are. So in light of that, I would ask that this bill be presented at the next or subsequent sitting of this Honorable House.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the first reading of a bill shortly entitled Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment.
Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension order number 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that standing order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed, Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment. Mr. Speaker, the main focus, the essence of this bill is really to change the name of the Trade Export Promotion Agency to Export St. Lucia. In recent times, Mr. Speaker, there has been a rebranding of St. Lucia and the agencies representing St. Lucia abroad. It is therefore intended that the name Export St. Lucia will reflect a more closely aligned name to what the agency is all about, what the core mandate of the agency is about. Although the current name Trade Export Promotion Agency speaks to the agency's primary function of export promotion, it has become the norm whenever you refer to that agency, you refer to them as TIPA, which unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, is devoid of any export of national significance or national significance. It was therefore suggested, Mr. Speaker, that TIPA's name be changed to Trade St. Lucia. However, in 2018, the National Export Council took a decision to request that Cabinet consider changing the name from Trade St. Lucia to Export St. Lucia. It was thought that Export St. Lucia was more in line with the main functions of the agency and would actually have more impact since it bore the name St. Lucia and Export. And it was in keeping with like name statutory boards like Invest St. Lucia, Event St. Lucia, St. Lucia CIP, and Travel St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, just some background information. In November 2016, the senior project officer from the International Trade Center, ITC, conducted a 5-day mission to St. Lucia as part of the ongoing technical assistance entitled Strengthening the Institutional Infrastructure for Export Promotion in St. Lucia. And at the close of the mission, it was a general consensus that TIPA's branding was not fully in line with government requirements and did not establish a country profile for exporters. This lack of clear identity in TIPA's name was commented on by several clients. Therefore, changing the name from Trade Export Promotion Agency to Export St. Lucia, after significant consultation and after recommendations from the ITC, National Export Council, feedback from the industry players, particularly manufacturers and other stakeholders, and also the staff of the TIPA, it was felt that the name Export St. Lucia was more suitable. So the name Export St. Lucia speaks directly to the core function of the agency, and what it does, it disambiguates from functions of other government agencies whose core functions may include other aspects of trade. So effective July 1st, 2018, the agency is being referred to as Export St. Lucia. Thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that the Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment Bill be read a second time. I now put a question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Trade Export Promotion Agency Act, Cap 13.32.
Honorable members, relatively short bill. Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of long title.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Amendment of section 2.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Amendment of section 5.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Insertion of new section 28.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Amendment of Principal Act.
It's not on Clause 7, but at the beginning, I apologize. We have
Okay.
2018, it should be 2019. At the beginning. At the beginning.
The number of the bill. Yeah, number of the bill. Yeah. On the cover, the number of the bill.
Yeah.
Number 2018. Should be number 2019. Clause 7.
Amendment of Principal Act.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be passed, the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that a report of the committee be adopted and that the Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Trade Export Promotion Agency Amendments Act 2019.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for a second reading a bill shortly entitled the Tourism Stimulus Investment Amendment.
Honorable, first reading. It's for first reading.
Oh, sorry, first reading. My apologies. I had it and I didn't do it right.
Tourism Stimulus and Investments Amendment.
Honorable, go ahead. Honorable Prime Minister, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order number 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Honorable Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Proceed.
Speaker, I beg to present the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill. This bill has two parts that we're looking to amend in the current Tourism Stimulus and Investment Bill, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, no, it's bill or act. The first one is as it relates to value-added tax. So let me just read that notwithstanding the value-added tax cap of 15.42, an approved development, aid during the development period is exempt from the payment of value-added tax on building material, furniture, equipment, and locally produced arts and craft, which currently is an incentive that we provide. And then B, during the development period, is eligible for a remittance in part of the value-added tax payable on accommodation and goods and services procured by the owner or operator of the tourism project if the tourism project has an investment value of not less than 50 million United States dollars. And part two of that is notwithstanding the rate of the value-added tax specified under the value-added tax cap for accommodation or goods and services, a remittance on the value-added tax payable under subsection 1B continues to be applicable to the tourism project under the subsection of the duration of the development period. So the two things is the ability to be able to give a remittance, and the second thing is that it can only be for the period of the incentives, or what is defined as a development period for the project. The second part that we're looking to amend, Mr. Speaker, is that an owner-operator of a tourism project that has been declared to be an approved development may make an application for tax reliefs and exemptions other than tax reliefs and exemptions specified under this Act for the remainder of the development period. An application under subsection 1 must be in the prescribed form, specify the tax reliefs or exemptions required, be accompanied by supporting information, and be submitted to the minister. On section 4.2 and 3 applies to this section as it applies to the supporting information for the application of an approved development. Where Cabinet has declared a tourism project to be an approved development under section 11, Cabinet may grant tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax reliefs and exemptions specified under this Act. It is satisfied that the approved development complies with the laws of St. Lucia. And B, the decision of Cabinet must specify, so it means whatever approvals we make, the Cabinet must specify the other tax reliefs, exemptions, and termination dates of the tax reliefs and exemptions. Other conditions as it considers necessary. The Minister shall inform the owner of the operator of the approved development in writing of the decision of Cabinet, which takes effect at the date of Cabinet's decision. Where Cabinet grants approval of an application under subsection 4, the Minister shall, by order published in the Gazette, specify the other tax reliefs and exemptions granted and the termination date of each tax relief and exemption, and the conditions specified by Cabinet under the subsection. So an example of this would be, Mr. Speaker, is that what we're finding more and more is as people are having to raise more monies, as an example, there are some developers, the very large developers, that are requiring that once they receive the incentives, they want to know that during their duration of their incentives, that any new incentives that are being granted, as an example, that they would automatically be able to benefit from those incentives. So again, with these larger hotels, particularly in which there is a tremendous amount of competitive spirit, we have basically said that we don't want to be able to use the incentives to discriminate against some of the larger investors that are taking place in St. Lucia. So it means with this amendment, Cabinet would be in a position in order to be able to give them that comfort that the incentives that they're receiving are the best incentives currently in St. Lucia, and that if over the next 20 years, as an example of their duration, that Cabinet, any future Cabinet, wants to provide any incentives above and beyond that, that they automatically would apply. That's just an example of one of the things, which is not really a tax concession, but it's an exemption in which would give Cabinet the authority to be able to grant that exemption.
Honourable Member for Guildford South.
Mr. Speaker, I hope my... Oh, sorry, I thought you had called me.
I did, but just to ensure that I do it right, I need to put the question first. I just realized I had not done that. Honourable members, the question is that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill be read a second time. Honourable Member for Guildford South.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that my comments on this piece of legislation would not be misconstrued, misunderstood, and would perhaps urge the caution that is intended. Mr. Speaker, there was a time in this House when an order paper was prepared and bills had to go through its 3 stages, that the leader of the government business would consult with the leader of the opposition and say, listen, today I'm going to go through the 3 readings of this bill because of some urgency. There's a reason and I require your cooperation. And I recall several instances when I served as a leader of government business, I consulted the then leader of the opposition and said, I require your assistance and cooperation on this matter. I'm sorry that both of them are not here today, meaning the member for Castries North and the member from Newquay North. So today we have a slew of bills to go through in one session, some very, 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 very serious pieces of legislation. And in fairness, sometimes there's no question that you need parliamentary time to do the research and to review legislation and to give credible responses to what you have. The legislation we are debating today, I think, was circulated to honorable members sometime last week, Thursday, which is, I guess, a normal circulation time. But Thursday or Friday, I can't remember. But the important thing is the important consequence of legislation that has to be reflected on. To be frank, I had hoped today that this tourism stimulus and incentive amendment bill would either have been withdrawn or alternatively rescheduled to another date or subsequent reading. There is, of course, a deeper debate that I think that has to take place sometime in the future, and maybe this is not the occasion for it. It is our own philosophy as a country as to what incentives we continue to give the hotel sector in these islands. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, you are aware that these incentives have aroused considerable anxiety, not just in our own jurisdictions, but in the wider Caribbean, our own Eastern Caribbean jurisdictions, but in the wider region, because even as part of its restructuring process, the Jamaican government had to do away with some of its very specialized incentives to the hotel sector. But it's a very deeper question as to how far a little country like ours could continue to rely on these incentives to attract investment. But I'm not going to touch that today. What I want to focus on, basically, is Clause 3 and the new Clause 12A. First of all, Mr. Speaker, under the amendment to the value-added tax, and in one breath one can say that's not highly unusual, because I think in that same Tourism Stimulus and Incentive Act, which was enacted some months ago by the former administration, an attempt was also made to waive value-added tax. And unfortunately, I don't have that legislation before me, but the anxiety would be Clause 7B. It says, during the development period is eligible for remittance in part of the value-added tax payable on accommodation. And these are the words that cause anxiety. And goods and services procured by the owner or operator. Now the question is, what really goods and services are you referring to here? And again, I don't have the original act, but a multiplicity of things can be included under the rubric of goods and services. In other words, there's no precision, there's no clarity, and the term is at large. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is really Clause A and A1 down to 4, which the member for Maple South read. Now that is pregnant with conflict, pregnant with issues. And it is here that I thought perhaps that the opportunity would be taken to send the bill back to the drawing board and to reflect on this. Let us look at these two subsections. 12.1a, it says an owner or operator of a tourism project that has been declared to be an approved development may make an application for tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax relief and exemption specified under the Act, meaning under the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act. In other words, it is saying that forget all the incentives under the Tourism and Incentives Act, but any other incentives Cabinet believes, or the minister, whoever believes, is required by the developer, then you grant it. Now, what these other incentives are, no one knows. No one will know. And then to make it worse, if you go down to clause 12A4, where Cabinet has declared a tourism project to be an approved development under Section 11, Cabinet may grant tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax reliefs and exemptions specified under this Act. It means, therefore, that you're going to grant exemptions, tax reliefs, for concessions apart from what you get in the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act. If, of course, it is a wish of the government to grant concessions or incentives over and beyond what is in the Tourism Incentives Act, it is in their interest to specify what these incentives are. Now, I'll tell you the problem with this. First of all, and I accept that an Attorney General's department has to take instructions from its cabinet. If the cabinet says, I want this legislation, all the Attorney General's department can do is to warn and to caution. But what is the problem? First of all, it collides frontally with all the statutory regime that you have in place, because it is the statutory regime that you have in place that grants you the authority to give precise incentives. It means, therefore, that Cabinet is positioning itself to ignore the entire statutory regime that has been enacted and proceeding on its own to grant these incentives. So it collides. It collides. The second problem with this, there's a fundamental rule that governs discretionary power. It is that there must be no uncertainty. There must be no overbreadth. If there's uncertainty and overbreadth, you get into trouble on constitutional grounds. And I really do believe, and it's up to honorable members, what is the policy, what is the approach they want to articulate, what they want to do. But at the same time, it seems to me that this bill should at least be reconsidered, be sent back to the drawing board, be tidied up, avoid the confusion, avoid the conflicts, and give it the clarity that it deserves. I don't want to say any more about this, Mr. Speaker. I leave it there. I mean, I've been told before, I mean, my advice is not needed. Fine, I accept that. I have no problems with that. But I also have a duty to warn and to caution on behalf of my constituents. Because this may well be used to do things in my constituency. And let it be understood that's what I'm doing. But this is not advisable. And I really do believe that it will serve the interests of honorable members if this legislation goes back to the drawing board and it is clarified at the soonest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Castres Office.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, listening to the contribution from the member for Viewfort South, if you are not in this house, if you've not been in this house for a period of time, and legislation like this comes in, then the submission comes across as being genuine, as being something that is worth considering. I'm learning from you. Mr. Speaker, every time a piece of legislation comes to this House, the Honorable Member for Vieux-Fort South gives you a nice preamble on the legislation, and then he comes and tells you why the legislation should go back. I've had several instances in this Honorable House where similar questions were raised, and we're talking about tourism incentive. You see, because we choose on this side of the House not to mention the names of companies and people who have benefited. But the Honorable Member for Vieux-Fort South knows when he was Prime Minister the leverage that he gave himself and the incentives that was granted to developers. I would not oppose him. They have certain things that in order to attract investment in this environment. Now, the member is calling into question statutory bodies and everything. He's saying, well, look here, almost like cabinet will be at loggerheads with these organizations or these entities that have been set up. But, Mr. Speaker, what was the last set of incentives passed in this Honorable House by the then Prime Minister under the tourism incentive? When we on the opposition raised certain issues in relation to the volume or the value of the investment and the tax incentive write-off that was given against food and beverage and other things in relation to this. In this amendment, and what we are presenting here, all the checks and balances are in place. Everything is in place to be scrutinized, to see what is there, and it must be in keeping with the laws. So while we can do things, cabinet always makes decisions. And I have dozens of cabinet conclusions where incentives were given for projects of tourism development in nature. So when we look at what the member is saying there, cabinet, I am getting from the member that cabinet cannot be trusted to make decisions on this matter. The member for Vieux-Fort South would know he is best placed than anybody else in this Honorable House to know about authority, to know when authority can be used and how it can be used. And I would assume whether his cabinet knew or his cabinet didn't know, the same person who wants to lecture us on what to do there and how to do it signed an agreement on the seabed. Did he advise himself? Today, the country is still paying millions of dollars to get out of an agreement. So you think that I will sit on this side of the House and take as genuine the concerns raised by the member for Vieux-Fort South? You see, our action always speaks louder than our words, Mr. Speaker. Our actions. And the actions of the member for Vieux-Fort South, for all the years I have been here, and he has been here, he was here before me, I have not seen anything in his actions that give me any reason to take what he says here. Because if you look at under clause B, it gives, during the development period, is eligible for a remittance in part of the value of the added tax payable on accommodation and goods and services procured by the owner or operator of the tourism project if the tourism project has an investment value of not less than 50 million United States dollars. Some of these incentives is not anything different from what was passed previously, because we know that the incentive that was passed for $100 million worth of investment, you got $100 million and more, you got the whole 100% write-off against. And it was the same government, the then government, that passed the incentives. If you look at the incentives given, that includes work permits, and you can go to some of the projects. I can mention the La Paradis project.
What is the bill specified?
What
Open is not specified.
What was given to La Paradis? Go and find out. And there's another hotel operating. Go and find out the incentives that was given. Go and find out everything that the then Minister of Finance. Go and find out how everything was cleared through customs. You see, because we choose, because, Mr. Speaker, it is not the fault of investors. And that is why I have taken a position that I'm not going to attack investors on what governments do that they should not do, or when they do not follow the proper procedure. It should not be the fault of the investor. We have to take that responsibility. And the members seated opposite, they knew what happened. They knew all the things that went on. But today, because they're sitting on the opposite side of the house, they want to use a different measurement, Mr. Speaker. A different measurement to what is happening. Getting foreign direct investment. And if we look at our neighboring territories and we see what is happening in terms of incentives, and I know the member for Vieux-Fort South knows better than what he's saying there. But you see, that's politics. That's not genuine concern about St. Lucia and getting projects. The same member is taking the government to court on development projects in this country. So there's always recourse. You concerned about recourse? You concerned about the well-being and what this government is giving away? Measure what you gave away, Mr. Speaker. I want him to measure, Mr. Speaker, what he gave away when he was in charge, and measure what this government is doing. Because the same member will present himself in this honorable house as being concerned, well, look here, it's not just this. If you think that the government has acted illegally, and we came to this house much earlier in this term, and we enacted laws that no matter what year after we leave government, that we would have acted inappropriately, the appropriate action can be taken. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't take at face value what is presented by the member for Vieux-Fort South. Everything is an intent or an attempt to stop development in this country. And things must be seen for what they are. The opposition is bent on trying to stop every development project that is earmarked to take place in this country to try and prove this government a failure. But they are the ones who have failed, Mr. Speaker, not this government. because the record of performance is there to show. And so when I look at under section 12A, subsection or section 4, where Cabinet has declared a tourism project to be an approved development under section 11, Cabinet may grant tax reliefs and exemptions other than the tax reliefs and exemptions specified under this act if satisfied that the approved developer complies with the laws of St. Lucia. The decision of Cabinet must specify the other tax reliefs, exemptions, and the termination dates and tax reliefs and exemptions. So what is in there? You think Cabinet can go and grant some concession and hide it at somebody's home for another government to find out years after that documents that should be in the vault or in the offices of government was found at a person's home? And today you want to come and advise this Cabinet, or you want to come and advise this Parliament about what we should do and how we should do it? Today, we are paying for it as a country. The same taxpayers that we are concerned about, they are the ones footing the bill, when these documents should have been in an office in government. It was at somebody's home. Under this government, when we pass tax incentives and when Cabinet makes decisions, and you all get all the leaked documents, so you should not have any problems. You should not have any problems knowing what is happening. So we are not going to hide incentives when we give incentives. We are not going to give it to people who are not in government to control. It will be in the offices of government. It will be there that everybody can see what incentives this Cabinet and this government is granting to anybody. And nobody without authority will sign documents that they don't have the authority to do, as has been done by the same former Prime Minister who wants to tell us today that we cannot follow this, or this is too ambiguous. So send it back and come back with something different. Mr. Speaker, it is time we call out people for who they are and what they have done in this country. This pretense needs to stop. If you couldn't do it when you were there, if you did it differently, come and apologize for what you did. And after you have apologized, then you can advise. But if you are not going to admit or realize that you did wrong, you did not follow the procedures established, but today you want somebody else to follow the procedure, it does not work, Mr. Speaker. It does not work. And so, I have every confidence. You want me to tell you what procedure? The seabed. Who signed the letters for the mining rights? I'm doing something about it now.
Honorable members, leader of the opposition. Proceed, honorable member for Castries Southeast.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. They warned him already. That's not a threat. But before we talk on this side, we're threatening. We don't threaten people. You warn. The people you have to warn sitting right next to you, you better start warning them.
Honorable member for Castries Southeast, please continue.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so this legislation before us is legislation that is needed to drive the development program that this country needs. And I have every confidence in the cabinet that I sit in, that this cabinet has the best interest of St. Lucia and the people of St. Lucia, and that every development project that is going to come through for approval and for incentives to the cabinet will meet the highest level of scrutiny and would comply with all the rules and regulations and laws that governs what should happen in this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, the bill, I believe, should go through as is.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if it were not for the people of Cashews East who have sent me here for so many years, I would really not come to this parliament, really. Because you come into this parliament, this morning the Prime Minister had some legislation regarding IBCs, International Trust, etc. We had a discourse, and we agreed that these bills were necessary. There was a discourse. We asked a few questions. The Prime Minister responded in a level of civility, and we moved forward.
Unusual civility.
Then they came with a bill on dealing with the setting up or the offsetting of liabilities. There was a discussion, civility. The Prime Minister consulted his legal people. We agreed. We decided in the spirit of a country. There was no mind reading. There was no imputing of any proper motives. It was men and women who were elected by the people of St. Lucia, some of them for a longer time than others. Now, having spoken about yesterday, I want to do something this morning. Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going there. Yesterday, we came to this honorable house and we spoke about a company called CHTTI. And we said, we did not mention anybody's name. We said a minister's wife was involved in CHTTI. A particular minister rose and asked me to said I was misleading the House. That was not true. I have here with me a document from the registry, which if you want, I will make it a document of the House, and I had to ask any minister in this honorable House, are they aware of who is the person's name involved in that document? Because you cannot come to this parliament where a member in the parliament, an elected member, is in good faith trying to say that, listen to me, let us relook at something. And you come and you castigate him, you say all kinds of things. You impute all improper motives for every time we come in this parliament and we try to make a contribution. This particular minister gets up and he castigates, he reads minds, he imputes all kind of improper motives just because he wants to make a point. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, this country cannot continue with this level of divisiveness. We were in Parliament yesterday. We argued, we argued. The majority prevailed. We moved on. This morning, we're here in a different spirit, trying to get things moving for the country. We have serious things about blacklisting. We have serious things, but it's the same story every day. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue with a country like this nature. We can't. No one person has the answers to this country's problems. Everybody needs to put their 2 pence. We are living in a democracy, and we have a right. This is absolutely ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely. I mean, we can't continue so. Every time comes to Parliament, Seabed, Greenberg, Seabed. If you have issues with Greenberg and Seabed, the same thing with St. Jude Hospital. I have come here in this honorable house, and I have said, if any member of the opposition behaved in an unethical way in any issue, as leader of the opposition and leader of the National Party, I'm saying take the necessary action. I have made that point. Yesterday we were in a motion. Today we are talking about different legislation. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that what the member of Viewfort South is saying is very simple. He's saying there's a Tourism Stimulus and Incentives Act. If you want, you can amend it so you can have some authority that you can relate back to an act. It's protection for all of us. It's protection for the entire cabinet. It's not protection for any particular person. It's not imputing any motives that the cabinet will do anything wrong. It's not saying that. All it's saying is that bring it into the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act, which you have already enacted. That's all we're saying. That's all. And, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Honorable Member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to join the Leader of the Opposition in expressing disappointment with the tone in which the deliberations this morning has taken. I think this morning, and like he quoted, despite the intense debate of yesterday, there was a spirit of, congeality and working together, and there were compromises from the government side. I mean, I'd never seen before in this House, or it's very rare, that we had seen concessions being made. And I think following on what happened yesterday, it was very welcome. It was very welcome. And the member from Viewfort South made a presentation. And it's a very simple point he was making. And there was absolutely no need for the member from Castries South East to offset the tone that we had this morning. And I need to say to the member from Castries South East, we are not against incentives, both sides. And anybody involved in public policy in this region or anywhere in the world will agree that incentives and concessions are part of the regime that attract investments to your country. You may argue that one particular government was more liberal in granting incentives and concessions, and they appropriately passed the incentives regime to allow for that. Another government might be more restrictive in what they give in incentives and concessions. And we can have differences, ideological differences, nationalistic differences about just how much incentives should be given. The member from Viewfort South was not arguing whether incentives should be given or not. There's no need to argue that he gives so much and what he gave and what he did not give. That was not the point of the presentation from the member of Viewfort South. I think we will all accept, and it is the point that the member was making, that having in legislation a clearly defined listing of the incentives and concessions gives certainty to investors, and it establishes a level playing field. If an investor is coming to your country, what this says is that I have no certainty as to the limit of what I can get, because I can apply for what the Act says, but there is space for me to get any amount more. There is no limit as to what I can get. There is no definition in there or any provision that, according to the size of my investment, what I qualify for. There is no certainty. But also important, Mr. Speaker, is there is no level playing field. There's no level playing field, because the very act that I have to apply to cabinet and a group of ministers means what's given to me is subject to their own interpretation and assessment of me. A particular minister may not like the investor, may not like his disposition, may not like his project, and may decide and influence his colleagues not to give a certain amount. Of course, we're speaking of beyond what the Act provides. So this change introduces uncertainty in the provision of incentives and concessions, because it says cabinet, in its own discretion, can provide extra beyond what the Act has. And the Prime Minister Leland Fortin, the Prime Minister in his explanation says he does not want to use the Act to discriminate between investors. The Act does not discriminate. The Act provides certainty. It provides a criteria for selection of who gets what. Making a change and making it open-ended, where a group of men and women can decide on their own how much more to That is what will create discrimination. Because the Prime Minister may not like Investor A's project. He may not like the investor for that matter, and can influence what that person gets. And that is the difficulty with the change, and this is what the member from Beaufort South was saying. That destroys certainty. It destroys the level playing field.
And it's in conflict with other acts.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm going to argue about it, but the member from Beaufort South is saying it's in conflict with other acts, and even if so, then it is probably even unconstitutional, Mr. Speaker. The member from Castle South says about checks and balances. Where are the checks and balances? Where are the checks and balances in this, the amendment being made? And he says the fact that it would be gazetted is sufficient. Is it really sufficient? How many people in St. Lucia read the Gazette? How many? I don't think there are more than 75 to 100 people, maybe more, because there are more lawyers than that, and they primarily read the Gazette. So you're saying to me, I apply for concessions, I receive it, another investor applies for concession, he receives it, I decide I want extras, I apply to Cabinet, I get my extras, and it is published in the Gazette, and you will say to me that's a check and balance? Now what happens when I am the one who feels, how could my competitor have gotten more than me? What do I have? What recourse do I have? Can I say I was treated unfairly? I can't. The law provides for Cabinet to give the extras. Can I say it's in breach of any law? The law gives Cabinet the right to make the decision on the extras. So what recourse do I have? And maybe the lawyers can explain to me. What recourse do I have if I believe as an investor that my competitor has been given extras beyond the act that both of us apply under, and I feel I'm being treated unfairly? Now the lawyers, please answer that for me. Can I now say that you're in breach of the law when the law says you have the right to give it to me? Maybe there's some principle in law. There's always a principle in law to try and justify something, Mr. Speaker. But on the face of it, there is a difficulty with giving Cabinet the unfettered right to give as many extras as they want to. And there's no criteria that would guide how they give the extras. Pardon? I can't hear you. But if there is a criteria, if there are established parameters for the extras, it's not stated here. And the member from Beaufort South is saying, maybe we should go back. No, I'm not talking about the VAT. I'm talking about... no, I don't think we're talking about the same. We are. Okay.
We're not talking about the same thing.
All right. So somebody has an investment of 175 million. Somebody has an investment of 150 million. Both of them above 50 million. The one with the investment of 175 million, you give him so many more extras. You don't give to the 150 million because you don't like him or their differences or whatever. What recourse does he have? What recourse does he have? That's the point I'm trying to make. What the member of Beaufort South said, maybe this should be tightened up and should be worded in a way which removes that uncertainty and which destroys the level playing field that we ought to have. That having in the legislation the incentives clearly spelled out and who qualifies for it according to what criteria introduces certainty and it establishes a level playing field. This act, this amendment changes that. So member from Cass's office is not an argument about whether we should give incentives. It's not an argument about whether we give more or you give more. It's not an argument of whether yours better or ours worse. That is not the point before us. The point is one, asking you to reflect on that amendment and see whether or not that's in the best interest of St. Lucia to do it in such a way, and whether or not it is in keeping with the laws of St. Lucia. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I was trying my best to not get into the realm of politics today, but I see we're being drawn into it. There are clearly parts of my colleagues' contribution today that I have to to share in what he said. That when we come to this house and what the attempt is to do is to act as if we're doing something abnormal. I won't even begin to question what the motives behind that are. So let us take up the issue that the member from, through you, Mr. Speaker, Castries South was talking about. How do we know that Cabinet can't discriminate against somebody? That's farcical. The incentives we have today, tourism incentives that have been here long before me and many of us here, and the amendments that have been made, all have criteria. The general incentives in tourism is what? Once you have 6 rooms. Past that, it's at the discretion of Cabinet. Yes, it is. Once you have an entity that's been identified as a tourism product, certified as a tourism product, and it has more than 6 rooms, it qualifies for incentives. It's at the discretion of Cabinet. And in fact, if in fact somebody in the public believes they're being discriminated, there's mechanisms for them to deal with that. We've clearly put here that the incentives, the amendments we're making here today, are for investments in excess of $50 million. And we've said that when people are making those kinds of investments, there's some level of a surety that they want in being able to move forward. The other part, Mr. Speaker, that is at least the member from Vieux-Fort South recollected that in fact it was his government that actually created the stimulus, and I said that he created the Stimulus Act. And in the Stimulus Act was what's called a tax credit. And based on the amount of investment that you were going to make is how much tax credits you would get. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm pretty sure I am not mistaken, that tax credit could be used for any duties during the construction and also the operation, which also included food and beverage.
Yes,
Something that has not been exempt. Okay?
specified in the law.
But we haven't classified in the law. All we're talking about is goods and services. Goods and services have always existed. Everybody knows what goods and services are. The big change here was that you could now give the VAT redemption on goods and services during the operation of the hotel, because we've already given it. It is there. We've already given the exemption on the construction. So the taxes that we're talking about, the things already exist. All we're saying is that there are things that come up in which we cannot anticipate, in which Cabinet must be given the flexibility to be able to do. So it is not unlawful because it says it must be keeping with the laws of St. Lucia and it must be gazetted. And if somebody has an issue with it, once it's gazetted, you can take action against it. But we must keep within. And in terms of what taxes have we not given to the hoteliers? What tax has been exempt from us? The one tax that was exempt was taxes on the duties on food and beverage. That was the one sacred cow that was out there for a long time. Let's say what it is. And in fact, when we created the Stimulus Act, and you allowed now a tax credit in order for not to pay the duties on food and beverage, the one last thing that we had, right, was taken away. And the sad reality, and we kept on saying that when we were in the House on this side, is that when you gave those incentives, it discriminated against those hotels that already had incentives. And because it was tied to an investment amount, a new investment amount, that anybody who had an existing hotel could not apply. And so we're looking to remedy that situation by allowing us to put into the Cabinet conclusions that any investment over $50 million, that government will give you the guarantee that if there's any new incentives that come on, that you will also apply. It is right. The tax credit that was given was for the additional investment. So that means that you had a new hotel coming on, okay, that it benefited from the incentives, that gets 100% waiver based on the investment they were making, a tax credit in food and beverage. A hotel that comes in before the act was put in does not. But you can't work. So if I already have a 400-room hotel and I'm expanding by 50 rooms, it may only qualify me for a portion amount. We said that. Let's not go down that road. But did we listen? We did not listen. But I am sitting here and standing here, sitting and standing and listening. And where it makes sense to amend, and this is not the first time today, there are many occasions in which members of the other side have said things, it's made sense, and we've made the amendments. Okay? And we will continue to listen because we are here to represent the best interest of the people of St. Lucia. And many times I have found myself complimenting the member from Vieux Fort South when he has made a positive contribution. Unfortunately today, Mr. Speaker, I cannot share his concerns. I do not believe that what he is bringing up is relevant because we have tied it to what the existing acts are. In fact, it's in the Stimulus Act. And we've been very specific in terms of what we can use it for. So I'd like to say there's one last thing. And if in fact members on the other side are absolutely genuine in what they acknowledged with regards to having a review of tourism incentives in general, I have to say to you that members on this side would welcome that. Because the fact is that not only do we have to have a review locally, but we've been asking for a review regionally in terms of tying our incentives because we find countries now competing against each other. And there are different times that you want to be able to apply incentives. Using Jamaica as an example, today Jamaica has 50,000 hotel rooms. When I was there in 1998, 2003, they only had 20,000. And they used the incentives to do what? To get that investment, to build the capacity in order to have an industry. And now that they have a much more successful industry, and economies of scale, cost of airfare, a lot of prices of a lot of other products have come down, they have now been able to reduce on the amount of incentives. It's not even just a bigger country. It reached a certain threshold. And so therefore, incentives are based on leveling the playing field from competitiveness. That's what they are. When we have electricity prices at 38 cents, when the airfare to come to St. Lucia is over $1,000, unfortunately, we're the ones having to pay the price to provide the incentives to make people more competitive. So, Mr. Speaker, I very much support these amendments. These amendments are going to go a long way in assisting us in tweaking our incentives to make sure that we're competitive, but at the same time, to make sure that we're cognizant at all times of how difficult it is to raise financing and the level of commitments that hoteliers are now seeking once they make these investments. Gone are the days that it was just an income tax corporate relief. Gone are the days it was just duties on building materials. Gone are the days now that it's just that. In fact, these agreements are becoming much more complicated. And I would very much welcome the opportunity to sit down with the opposition and have a committee to review tourism incentives, manufacturing incentives, all of our incentives, and how we are going to compete moving forward in the rest of the world. So again, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the support of my colleagues.
Honourable members, the question is that a tourism stimulus and investment amendment bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Act, capped 15.03, and for related matters.
Honourable members, Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Amendment of Section 7.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Insertion of new Section 12A.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as were contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill went through committee stage with no amendments. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Bill be read a third time and passed. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Tourism Stimulus and Investment Amendment Act 2019.
Honorable Minister for Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Castries Constituency Council.
Castries Constituency Council.
Honorable Minister for Equity, Social Justice, Local Government and Empowerment.
Mr. Speaker, despite what is indicated on the other paper, the intention to go through the further readings, I'd like to show deference to the request of the opposition, who have requested more time to study this bill. And so I will, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading in the next or subsequent sitting of this Honorable House.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned sine die.
Honorable members, the question is that the House do stand sine die. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is adjourned.